guys, I'm Ashley. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to knit this cozy cocoon cardigan. It's chunky and oversized. It's a fun knit. And just wanted to give you a heads up. The pattern, you can follow along with me in the video tutorial. I walk you through how to knit this step by step. If you're looking for pattern directions, please feel free to check out the video description. I've written out the pattern there in the video description. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time just to explain how the cocoon cardigan is constructed. So we start off by casting on stitches here, and we knit a very long rectangle, all right? And then you cast off stitches, and you are left with a pretty long piece of knitted work, and then you fold the rectangle in half. And then we seam up the sides, each side of the sweater. We leave an opening for armholes, and then we will pick up stitches and knit sleeves. And then we pick up stitches and knit the ribbing. And when you wear it, the sweater opens up like this. And I just wanted to explain this because people often ask me how to modify sizes for this. And this is a little, it doesn't fit like your average cardigan. So it's hard to really recommend how to change the size. A lot of people think you need to change the cast on stitches to make it wider. But in reality, really it's more about the length. The longer you make the cardigan, the longer it will be from your sleeve to your your mid bust. So if you want to make it longer, you'll just add length to the original piece. And then, if you want to add width, that means it'll just hang down longer from elbow to elbow. So this is where one elbow sits, and this is where the other elbow sits. So that's how it's constructed. I just wanted to explain that. And I also wanted to explain cast on stitches and changing your gauge if you want to change your gauge. So basically, we start by casting on 75 stitches on 12 millimeter needles. My gauge is 7.5 stitches per 4 inches. So the cardigan measures 40 inches in width here. And if you want to change your gauge, all you have to do, so if I have 7.5 stitches per 4 inches and I'm knitting to a 40-inch width, all I had to do was multiply that by 10. So 7.5 times 10 is 75. So if you have, maybe you're knitting on worsted weight yarn on 5 millimeter needles and you've got, 18 stitches, per 4 inches, all you have to do is multiply 18 by 10, and that'll get you how many stitches you need to cast on. And then you can just follow the directions for the length, right? So we will be knitting the stockinette piece for 36 inches. So you can just knit however you want to knit for 36 inches. And then the sleeve opening, I believe, is about 7 inches or so, 6 inches or so. But so you can just follow the measurements, the length and the measurements accordingly. So that's just a little bit about the sweater and how it's constructed. It will drape a little bit it'll kind of come together. It'll gather a little bit on the bottom, and that's just how it kind of sits. So anyway, that's how you construct a cocoon sweater. All right, to knit this sweater, you will need 6 skeins of Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick yarn. This is the color Slate. 1 skein has 6 ounces, 170 grams, 106 yards, 97 meters. So I use just over 5 skeins, so you will need 6. If you're using a different kind of yarn, just make sure you know how much yarn is in this skein and you're doing the math. So basically, you need, probably like 500 and I'd say 600 yards at a minimum. And if you decide to make this bigger, you'll obviously need more yarn. So that's the yarn. I love Woolies Thick and Quick yarn for this project because It's super cozy, super warm, and it knits up pretty quickly. So that's what I used. Again, that was the color Slate. You will need, for needles, you will need US 17 12 millimeter 40-inch circular needles. If you want to use smaller lengthwise needles, that's fine. It's just hard because you're going to end up with a lot of stitches on your needles. So that's what you'll need to knit up the main body of the sweater. You will need size 10 millimeter or US 15 16-inch circular needles to knit up the sleeves. If you would like to use double pointed needles, you may. I like to use 10 millimeter needles for the sleeves to make the ribbing where we knit the sleeves in 1x1 rib, and it just creates a nice tight look. And then for the body ribbing, you will need size 40-inch 10 millimeter US 15 circular knitting needles. I like to do the ribbing a little bit tighter than the body. You will need a stitch marker. You'll need a stitch marker or a piece of scrap yarn in a different color to denote the beginning or end of round when you're doing the ribbing and the sleeves. You will need a tape measure to measure the length of the work. And you will need a pair of scissors. And you will also need a tapestry needle to weave in your ends and to seam up the sides. All right, we are going to start by casting on 75 stitches here. So I am going to grab the end of my yarn here, and I'm going to wrap the yarn around my needle about 10 times. And that gives me the approximate length for a long tail cast on for about 10 stitches. So I'm just going to go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and then I'll do a little bit more for 5. So I am now at the end of that going to make my slip knot and pull the yarn through, put my slip knot on my work, and I'm going to make sure my long tail is in front, and I'm going to cast on 75 stitches. All right, so we grab the yarn and we go under the yarn around our thumb, over the yarn around the index finger, and pull through. That's 2 cast on stitches, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So continue until you have 75 stitches. All right, so I have cast on 75 stitches. And the great thing about making a cocoon cardigan is that it's pretty straightforward with the shape. We're simply going to knit a rectangle using stockinette stitch. So all you're gonna do is turn the work over. This is the right side of the work, you can kind of see here. And when we turn it over, this is the wrong side of the work. So when we're on the wrong side of the work, our first row is going to just be a purl stitch. And whenever we're on the wrong side of the work, we just purl all the way across. So you simply work all the way across on this side purling. All right, so I've completed purling all the way across. Now I'm going to flip the needle and knit across the right side of the work. So this is what stockinette stitch is: purling on the wrong side, knitting on the right side. So you're going to continue this, you're going to continue stockinette stitch until the piece measures about 36 inches from end to end. So from the cast on end to where you are on the needle. So you're going to end up, like I said, with a big rectangle, and then I will show you how to seam the work together to change the rectangle into a cocoon cardigan. So I'll meet you back here in a little bit and show you what this is looking like. All right, I'm going to show you what to do when you need to join your next skein of yarn or a skein of yarn. I've completed a lot already here. I am finishing up my third skein and I'm about to join my fourth skein. But I just wanted to show you how I join. It doesn't matter if you're on the wrong side of the work or the right side of the work. When you have enough left for about 4 stitches on your original skein, you grab your second skein and leave a tail, and you're going to be double knitting for 4 stitches. So you just continue knitting as you would. I'm on the wrong side, so I'm actually purling, and I am using 2 strands of yarn, the original skein and the new skein. Here's the 4th stitch, and then I drop the original and continue knitting or purling with the new piece of yarn. So you will have a few stitches that are double, which is fine. You don't really notice, but one thing to remember is when you work those stitches on the next row, you need to work them as if they were one stitch. So when you get to that point, you just need to work them as if they were one stitch, and you can pull them, the loose strands in the back, and there you go. You have successfully joined your next skein, and you can just trim those and they're already woven in. That's the easiest way. So I just wanted to show you kind of where I am at this point. I just joined my 4th skein. Like I said, I'm almost done knitting this big panel. Just wanted to show you what it's measuring and how much more I have left. It's measuring about 28 inches right now, and I'm going to continue knitting until about 36 inches, so I have a little ways to go here. Again, the longer you make this, the wider it will be from the arms to your bust line, and I'll show you once we're completed here. But it also means that's how long it will be from the back of your neck down to your body. Just a reminder. So continue knitting until you get to 36 inches and ending after a wrong side row. So we're going to bind off the work on the right side of the work, this side. So just make sure you finished after a wrong side row. All right, I will see you back here when it is time to bind off. All right, guys, so I have finished the big rectangle here. I've ended after a wrong side row, so I'm on a right side row. My work measures about 36 inches from end to end here from our cast on edge. I'll show you here. It's about 36 inches. Sorry, it's upside down. So now it's time to bind off, and what we do to bind off is simply knit 2 stitches at the beginning, 1, 2, and we're simply going to lift that first stitch over that second stitch and keep that stitch on, and then you just continue in that fashion all the way across until you get to the last stitch. All right, so you simply just keep knitting and slipping that stitch over, trying to keep it a bit loose, but not too loose. All right, I'm nearing the end of my bind off row here, and just wanted to show you what to do when you get to the very last stitch. So you work the last stitch, bind off, and then what we're gonna do is cut a tail. And I would say cut it to be probably about a little over 2 feet. You want it kind of long because we're gonna use this to seam up this one side here. So trim that, and now just pull the stitch through and you have a secure end. Okay? Okay, so now it's time to seam the sides. So we just bound off our work. So fold the work in half horizontally, okay? So that the work is facing you as you would knit, right? So just don't fold it over sideways. We're gonna just fold it over horizontally here. And you're gonna take your tapestry needle. So basically we are gonna seam up both sides here and leave a gap for armholes at the top. Okay, and we're gonna do that on both sides. We're gonna line up both sides and seam them up and leave a gap for the armhole. Okay, so thread your tapestry needle on front in that tail that you just left, and we are gonna seam up our work horizontally. So I usually just kind of go through the bottom one time to connect the sides, and then you basically, when you seam up the work, you're going to be going through two stitches there, kind of 2 bars there, okay, on either side. And you can see that you'll have this edging here. So you go up here, and then you can always tighten your work later. And then you go to this side and go through 2 bars here and pull through. And you keep going in this fashion. You can see this is where you came out before. So you go through the next 2 bars on this side. And you keep working your way up. You can kind of tighten it as you go. That's the extra tail from before. But you can see it starts to kind of create this invisible seam. You just keep going. So basically we're going to continue seaming the sides until we get to, see, look, and then once you can just basically pull the work together. Now it doesn't matter if it's a little wonky here at the end. We're going to be picking up stitches, so we'll make that a little bit tighter. But basically you just want to keep making sure that you are seaming correctly as you go. And it does look pretty invisible as you get going. So yeah, you just continue going in those bars all the way up until you get to the point where you need to stop so we can make our sleeves. Okay, and we're going to be picking up 16 stitches on each side of the sleeve. If you would like to change that number, feel free. Okay, so basically we are going to pick up a stitch for every row on 10mm needles, so they're much smaller, and we're going to be doing a 1x1 rib. So normally I would pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows or 4 stitches for every 5 rows, but because we're going to do the sleeves on much smaller needles and we're doing a 1x1 rib, we're going to pick up a stitch for every row here. So we just need to make sure there's 16 rows on this side and 16 rows on this side to get to 32 stitches. So I think I'm almost there. I'm going to count from the top down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So I'm going to do about 2 more, I'm going to seam up 2 more sections here and then call it quits. I'm going to leave the seam loose in case I need to alter anything later on. So I'm just going to pick up that last one here and go in over here kind of one last time and just seam this together. I'm probably just going to go in here and leave it on the inside. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of double check here the stitch count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. Okay, it's pretty even. I might have to seam up a little bit more, but basically, if you just kind of leave this, you can take the needle off, but we can seam up any gaps after we've picked up. Basically, we've seamed up one side and we've left a little leeway here for the sleeve. So now we're going to pick up 32 stitches for the sleeves. So, but first you're going to want to seam up the other side. And then I'll meet you back here once you're done seaming up this side. You will just need to cut a new piece of yarn here. Pretty long piece of yarn, and just join the work and start seaming up that other side. And I usually, not like that, I usually just kind of, this one we don't have a tail, so I usually just kind of bring the work together at the bottom here. Just kind of seam it, pull it together, leave a tail here, and then start the picking up 2 bars in between that last stitch on each side. Find the last stitch and then go in between and pick up 2 bars on either side, and you'll continue this and do the same thing and try to figure out how much room you need to leave to pick up 32 stitches for the sleeve. One thing I wanted to note for those who are making this in a different gauge, this sleeve opening is about 7 inches, so that's pretty safe. Just to give you an idea of how big to make the sleeve opening, it's about 7 inches there. So now it's time to knit the sleeves. And what you're gonna wanna do is take those same 16-inch needles. And what we're gonna do is start at the bottom, at the armhole here, and we're going to pick up stitches around the armhole, 32 stitches. And so you just pick up a stitch for every row here in the work all the way around. Two, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. All right, so I'm going to pick up my last stitch. That's 32 stitches here around the sleeve. All right. And like I said earlier, if you have too much space, I will have to close up some of the gap here, and that's okay. Not a problem. I'll show you how to kind of seam that all together at the end. But now we need to join our sleeve stitches in the round here. So grab a stitch marker. So I've got my stitch marker handy. I did thread my tapestry needle back through the piece of yarn I used to seam up the side here, and I was just gonna kind of close it up a little bit more before I keep going. So on that side and this side here, and I'm just gonna kind of push it back through, and we can kind of weave in our ends later, but just wanted to seam that up a little bit more. Okay, so now it's time to join this work in the round, and then we're gonna work our 1x1 rib for our stitches. So to join this work in the round, that was cast on a little backwards. So to join this work in the round, I'm going to move my first stitch over to the right hand needle, move my last stitch over to the left hand needle, twist the work. Okay, I will need to pull on my stitch a little there. And then I'm going to place the stitch marker. Oh, that stitch marker is too small. Then I'm going to place my stitch marker and start my 1x1 rib. So knit 1, purl 1, and when you work this very first round, the stitches are on backwards. The stitches are on the work backwards because when we pick up stitches, we pick them up on the needles a little bit differently. So just make sure you insert the needle kind of through the back loop and purl so the stitches aren't twisted. Normally we insert our needle into the stitch this way. We're going to insert it in the back there because it's on backwards, and then when we purl through that back stitch. So basically we're just ensuring that our stitches aren't twisted. So if I were to purl through the front like I normally do, the stitch would be twisted. So we're just going to knit 1, purl 1 all the way across our 32 stitches. And again, if you would like to make your sleeves wider, feel free. Your opening would be bigger and you would just pick up more stitches. So I'm just continuing all the way around in my 1x1 rib. It's a tad tight on the 16-inch circular needles. You could use DPNs if you'd like. I personally, whoops, this should be a purl. I personally don't like knitting on double pointed needles as much, so I try to use 16-inch needles as often as possible. All right, so I'm nearing the beginning of the round here, and all you do when you get to the beginning of the round is, and then I usually end up twisting the work back because it can get, if you keep working in one direction, the work will get all twisted. And then again, you can pull on the stitches to tighten everything up here. Knit, purl, and then you just slip the marker here and continue the knit 1, purl 1. And again, you can just pull on this to keep things taut. So yes, just continue on in the knit 1, purl 1 until you get to your desired sleeve length. I'm going to keep going and I'll let you know how long I make mine. I'm going to try mine on and see how it's fitting. But you can see the rib stitch start to come together. So just keep knitting the 1x1 rib until your desired sleeve length, and I will show you how to bind off, but I'll let you know how long I make mine. I'll be back in a little bit. All right, so I've completed my sleeve for about 9 inches, and now I'm going to show you how to bind off in the 1x1 rib. And all you do is knit your first stitch, purl your second stitch, and then you're going to lift that stitch over your first stitch, and you continue in the pattern. So you knit one, bind off a stitch, purl one, bind off a stitch, knit one, bind off a stitch, purl one, bind off a stitch. So continue that all the way around until you get to your last stitch, and then I'll show you how to finish off. All right, so I'm nearing the end here, and I'm going to purl my last stitch, bind it off. Then I'm gonna cut a little tail here, and I'm gonna pull the stitch through, and now we're gonna weave in this end. All right, now it's time to pick up and knit stitches for our ribbing, and I like to do this at the end because you can try the garment on, and you can determine how long you'd like to make it if you'd like to customize the length. I'm going to make my ribbing about 3 inches, and we're going to pick up and knit stitches. And because we're picking up and knitting stitches along the cast on edge or the cast off edge, I'm going to show you how to pick it up so that it looks like we're just continuing stitches normally. So you're going to want to pick up and knit stitches into the V on this side, and then when we go around to the other side, our work will be facing kind of the other direction. We'll just have to make sure you're picking up stitches into that V the right way. Okay, so we are going to start by finding the middle of our work and picking up and knitting a stitch into that V, okay? And then it'll look like our stitch is just a continuation of our edge. So also one other thing to note is that you're gonna want to make sure that you have an even number of stitches once we get to the other side, okay? So just keep inserting your needle and picking up a stitch in the middle of the V and not in the upside down V, because this way it'll look like our work is just continued on and we don't have a gap from, you just basically want the ribbing to look like it goes seamlessly. Okay, and this is the way I pick up stitches. I put the yarn over my needle. It's just kind of automatic for me. If you don't, and then I have to work in the stitches in the wrong way when I come around on that first round. If you want to avoid that and you want your work to be going the same way, you can put your yarn up from underneath and pull it through, and then your stitch will be facing in the right direction. So that's how you can make sure that your stitches are facing in the same direction. I just, for some reason, it's just easier for me to go this way. It's just always what I've done. But basically, you can do whatever works for you if you don't want to have to go into the stitch in the wrong direction on your first round. So continue to go into that V, and then once we get to this seam, I'll show you how to make sure you continue going into the right V, and I'll also show you how to make sure you don't put too many stitches at that seam. You don't want the seam, the ribbing to kind of like bow out at that seam, so you kind of need to skip over some of the space so you don't have too many stitches around the seam. Okay, so I'm going to continue on, and then I'll show you what to do once you get to the seam. But again, see how the loops come up and it looks like it's seamless and going in that direction. Okay, so I'm approaching the seam. I've gone into that last V here, and this is where my work kind of comes together. It's a little wonky here, but we also need to make sure we're starting to go into the stitch that looks like a V over here. So I'm gonna go in right here and pull the yarn up. So it looks a little seamless across that seam. So continue making sure you're inserting your needle into that V, okay? And basically we're just making sure that our work is going to look as seamless as possible. So I will meet you back here once I've picked up stitches all the way around the top and the bottom of the work. So it's one huge circle. So make sure you have your longest circular needle, and we're going to continue this all the way around. And then we'll just do the 1x1 rib and bind off after 3 inches. And again, make sure you are picking up and knitting an even number of stitches because you want the 1x1 rib to work out evenly. You want to end on a purl stitch and not a knit stitch when you are completing your first round of your 1x1 rib. Okay, so I'll see you back here when I am finished picking up stitches. All right, so I'm nearing the end here of picking up stitches. Again, just make sure you've got an even number of stitches and you're going in the right stitch, the upright V. All right, so you can just place a stitch for a stitch marker after you join the work, and I usually just kind of slip the stitches over one another and twist that original stitch, and then place the stitch marker, and that denotes the beginning of the round. And just make sure you're doing a knit 1, purl 1, and again, I have to go into my stitches backwards because of the way I pick up my stitches, but if you have picked them up opposite of me, you won't have to go into your first round of stitches backwards. So just continue the knit 1, purl 1 rib. So you're knitting the knit stitches, purling the purl stitches once you get all the way back around. And again, just make sure you had an even number of stitches so you end with a purl over here after that first round. So I'm going to continue on here. I am going to like I said, I'm going to complete the ribbing for 3 inches and then bind off in the 1x1 rib. So I'll meet you back here when it's time to bind off, just to show you how I bind off again. I'm going to bind off the same way as I did the sleeves. But now you can see our knit stitches look like, because we went into the stitch and picked up the stitch into the V, now our knit stitches look like they're just a continuation from our original work. So it's important to make sure you're going into those stitches when you pick up those stitches the right way. All right, so like I said, I will see you back here when I'm ready to bind off for the ribbing. All right, so it's time to bind off for the ribbing. You can see I'm knitting in one big circle here. And we're going to bind off the same way we bound off for the sleeves. Just show you one more time. You work to the beginning, slip your marker, and then just start working in the pattern. Knit 1, purl 1, slip that first stitch over the second stitch here, knit. And you just keep working in the knit 1, purl 1 pattern and bind off, and try to bind off loosely here. Don't pull the yarn too tight. Again, there's lots of different ways to bind off. This is kind of the most simple and straightforward if you're a newer knitter, but people's complaints about this way to bind off is that it's not super stretchy. So if you want to bind off another way, feel free. This to me is just kind of the most simple. But you're going to work all the way around until you get to that last stitch. All right, I'm almost at the end of binding off for the ribbing here. And I'm gonna just finish binding off these last couple stitches, and then I'll show you how to finish it off and weave in this end here. So now I've got one stitch left. I'm gonna leave a little bit of a tail, snip the yarn, and pull it through here. And then I'm gonna set my needle aside. I'm gonna grab my tapestry needle. It's always hard because whenever I try to thread this tapestry needle on camera, it never goes in easily. Oh, there we go. We're good. And then I try to kind of go through the work and connect the sides and kind of come back through that original part here. And then I'm going to kind of weave in the tail here by inserting the needle through the work this way. And this kind of helps it be invisible on the other side. And I'll probably go all the way through to the bottom here and just pull the yarn through. And then I will kind of stretch out the work a little bit. I will take that off and snip the end. And now you can weave in the rest of your ends and seam up any armhole gaps you have. I'm going to go back to this armhole. There was a bit of a gap here. I'm just going to rethread my needle and kind of go through the stitches around that gap to kind of close it up. And no exact science. I mean, everybody kind of does this differently. I'm not real regimented about how I do this. I basically just kind of try to go through the stitches surrounding that gap and close it up. You can check it on the other side. That looks pretty good. So then now I'll just kind of weave my needle through this seam. This is pretty thick, so it really won't be seen on the other side. And you can just kind of pull it through, give it a little tug, snip it, and there you go. That's how you seam up the armhole gaps. That's how you weave in your ends, and you can do the rest, and your sweater will be complete.